Thursday, January 29th, 2026. Late evening. President Donald Trump posts on Truth Social a threat so reckless, so unprecedented, so dangerous that aviation experts are calling it nonsense and warning of catastrophic impacts on air safety. Trump says he's decertifying all Canadian-made aircraft flying in the United States. Every Bombardier business jet, every regional airliner, potentially even Airbus A220 commercial planes, and he's threatening a 50% tariff on any Canadian aircraft sold in America. The reason? He claims Canada is wrongfully, illegally, and steadfastly refusing to certify Gulfstream business jets made in Georgia. Except there's one problem with Trump's claim. It's completely false. Canada hasn't refused to certify Gulfstream jets. They're reviewing new paperwork for updated electronic systems, standard regulatory procedure that happens all the time. But Trump doesn't care about facts. He doesn't care about aviation safety. He doesn't care that decertifying aircraft for trade reasons has never happened in the history of civil aviation. He's using air safety, the lives of passengers on thousands of flights, as a weapon in his personal feud with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. This is the moment Trump's trade war crossed from reckless to genuinely dangerous. Let's break down exactly what Trump threatened, because the implications are staggering. In his Truth Social post, Trump wrote, "Based on the fact that Canada has wrongfully, illegally, and steadfastly refused to certify the Gulfstream 500, 600, 700, and 800 jets, one of the greatest, most technologically advanced airplanes ever made, we are hereby decertifying their Bombardier Global Expresses and all aircraft made in Canada until such time as Gulfstream, a great American company, is fully certified." Then he added, "If, for any reason, this situation is not immediately corrected, I am going to charge Canada a 50% tariff on any and all aircraft sold into the United States of America." So Trump is making two separate threats. Threat 1, decertification. This would mean revoking the safety certification that allows Canadian-made aircraft to fly in American airspace. Let's be clear about the scale here. According to aviation analytics company Cirium, there are currently 150 Bombardier Global Express business jets registered in the U.S., operated by 115 different operators, more than 400 Canadian-made regional jets, Bombardier CRJ series, flying for U.S. airlines, thousands of private and civilian jets built in Canada that fly in U.S. airspace every single day. If Trump actually decertifies these aircraft, they would be grounded. Immediately, airlines would have to cancel flights. Business jet operators would be unable to fly. The entire U.S. air traffic system would be thrown into chaos. Threat 2, 50% tariff. This would apply to any and all aircraft sold into the United States of America. That includes Bombardier business jets, which compete directly with Gulfstream, Bombardier regional jets used by U.S. Airlines Airbus A220 commercial aircraft, manufactured in Quebec, de Havilland turboprop planes, aircraft components and parts manufactured in Canada. A 50% tariff would essentially kill the Canadian aircraft industry's ability to sell into the U.S. market. It would devastate Bombardier, impact Airbus's North American operations, and force U.S. airlines that operate Canadian-made planes to pay massively inflated prices for parts and maintenance. And all of it, is based on a completely false claim about Canada refusing to certify Gulfstream jets. Here's what's actually happening with Gulfstream certification in Canada. John Graddick, who teaches aviation leadership at McGill University, explained it clearly. Gulfstream has changed the electronics and navigation system of some of its models to extend their flying range and payload, and the Canadian aviation regulator is reviewing the changes. We haven't decertified the Gulfstream. We are looking at the paperwork. That's what's taking time now. This is normal. This is standard regulatory procedure. When an aircraft manufacturer makes significant changes to avionics or navigation systems, aviation regulators review those changes to ensure they meet safety standards. It's not a trade barrier. It's not discrimination against American companies. It's aviation safety regulators doing their jobs. And here's the key fact Trump is ignoring. Many Gulfstream jets are already certified in Canada and fly there regularly. According to Transport Canada's Civil Aviation Database, There are 21 Gulfstream aircraft listed, so when Trump claims Canada has wrongfully, illegally, and steadfastly refused to certify Gulfstream jets, he's lying. Canada hasn't refused certification. They're processing updated certification for newer models with modified systems. This is how aviation regulation works globally. Under international aviation rules, the country where an aircraft is designed, the U.S. in Gulfstream's case, is responsible for primary certification, known as a type certificate. This certifies that the basic design is safe. Other countries then validate that certification for their airspace, but they have the right to request additional data or refuse validation if they have safety concerns. This system exists because every country has the sovereign right to determine what aircraft can fly in their airspace based on their own safety standards. For context, after the Boeing 737 MAX crashes, European regulators delayed endorsement of U.S. certification decisions and demanded design changes before allowing the plane back in European skies. That created tensions with the FAA, but it was within European regulators' rights. Canada asking for additional review of modified Gulfstream systems is standard practice. It's not a trade barrier, it's aviation safety regulation, but Trump doesn't care. He's turned a routine regulatory process into a pretext for economic warfare. Aviation experts are alarmed by Trump's threat for a very specific reason. Aircraft certification has never, ever been weaponized for trade purposes. John Graddick put it bluntly, certification is not trivial. It is a very important step in getting planes to operate safely. Somebody is not picking on the Gulfstream. Decertification for trade reasons does not happen. Ross Amer, CEO of California-based Aero Consulting Experts, was equally direct. You can't just say, just because Canada didn't do what we want them to do, I'm going to decertify the airplane. Why is this so dangerous? Because aviation certification is about safety, not politics. It's a technical process conducted by expert regulators who assess whether aircraft meet rigorous safety standards. The moment you start making certification decisions based on trade disputes rather than safety evaluations, you undermine the entire global aviation safety system. Think about what Trump is threatening. He wants to ground Canadian aircraft not because they're unsafe, but because he's mad at Mark Carney. That's insane. That's dangerous. That puts lives at risk. Amer pointed out that Trump has the authority to ground aircraft in some extreme cases, as he did with the Boeing 737 MAX 8 during his first administration. But that was a safety decision based on 2 fatal crashes and clear evidence of design flaws. Grounding Bombardier jets because Canada is taking too long to process Gulfstream paperwork? That's not a safety issue. That's political retaliation, and it sets a catastrophic precedent. If the United States can decertify aircraft for trade reasons, what stops other countries from doing the same? What stops China from decertifying Boeing jets because of U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods? What stops the EU from grounding American aircraft because of trade disputes? You destroy the international cooperation that makes modern aviation possible. Graddick emphasized this point. Aircraft certification, especially between Canada and U.S., has always been very close, with Canadian authorities and the FAA in unison. For decades, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration and Transport Canada have worked together seamlessly. They recognize each other's certifications. They collaborate on safety standards. They share data. Trump is threatening to blow up that relationship over a business rivalry between Gulfstream and Bombardier. Let's be honest about what's really happening here. This isn't about aviation safety or unfair trade practices. This is about Gulfstream wanting the U.S. government to help them beat their Canadian competitor. Bombardier and Gulfstream are head-to-head rivals in the ultra-long-range business jet market. The Bombardier Global Series competes directly with Gulfstream's G500, G600, G700, and G800 models. And here's the critical context. Bombardier is winning in production volume. According to a 2025 report by the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, Bombardier produced 146 luxury planes in 2024. Gulfstream produced 138, but Gulfstream recorded $8.3 billion in billings versus $6.3 billion for Bombardier. So Bombardier makes more planes, but Gulfstream makes more money per plane. They're competing for the same ultra-wealthy customers who want the latest, most advanced business jets. And now Gulfstream has apparently convinced Trump to use the power of the US government to attack their competitor. It's not the first time Trump has targeted Bombardier. During his first term, the U.S. Commerce Department imposed duties of nearly 300% on Bombardier's C-Series commercial jet, charging that the Canadian company was selling planes below cost using unfair government subsidies. Those allegations were brought by Boeing, and the U.S. International Trade Commission later ruled that Bombardier did not injure U.S. industry. Bombardier eventually sold the C-Series program to Airbus, and it's now manufactured as the A220, ironically, at a plant in Quebec that could also be hit by Trump's threatened tariffs. So we've seen this movie before. American aerospace companies complain about Canadian competition. Trump imposes tariffs or threatens other punitive measures. The claims fall apart under scrutiny. But by then, damage has been done to the Canadian company. This time, though, Trump isn't just threatening tariffs. He's threatening to ground planes, to decertify aircraft that have been safely flying for years. That crosses a line that's never been crossed before in modern aviation. Here's what Trump doesn't seem to understand. Decertifying Canadian aircraft doesn't just hurt Canada. It devastates American airlines and American passengers. Hundreds of Bombardier CRJ regional jets operate for U.S. airlines. These are the smaller planes you fly on when you're going from a major hub to a smaller city. United American Delta. All the major carriers have regional partners that operate Bombardier CRJs. If those planes are suddenly decertified, those routes get canceled. Smaller cities lose air service. Passengers are stranded. The entire hub-and-spoke system that keeps American aviation running gets disrupted. And it's not just regional jets. There are 150 Bombardier Global Express business jets registered in the U.S. These are owned by corporations, executives, and ultra-wealthy individuals who use them for business travel. If those jets are decertified, American businesses lose critical transportation infrastructure. Deals get delayed, meetings get canceled, economic activity slows. Bombardier emphasized this in their statement. Thousands of private and civilian jets built in Canada fly in the U.S. every day. We hope this is quickly resolved to avoid a significant impact to air traffic and the flying public. They're not exaggerating. The impact would be immediate and severe. But there's another angle that makes this even worse for American companies. Maintenance and parts. Even if Trump doesn't actually decertify aircraft, a 50% tariff on Canadian aircraft and parts would massively increase operating costs for U.S. airlines. Parts for Bombardier jets, now 50% more expensive. Maintenance contracts with Canadian suppliers, 50% surcharge. Replacement aircraft to expand regional routes, suddenly unaffordable. U.S. airlines would have to absorb those costs or pass them on to passengers. Either way, American travelers pay more. And for what? To help Gulfstream sell a few more business jets to Canadian buyers? The math doesn't add up. The policy doesn't make sense. But Trump doesn't care about the collateral damage. Bombardier's response to Trump's threat was measured, professional, and subtly defiant. In a statement, the company said, "We have taken note of President Trump's social media post and are in contact with the Canadian government. Thousands of private and civilian jets built in Canada fly in the U.S. every day. We hope this is quickly resolved to avoid a significant impact to air traffic and the flying public." Then they added a key point. Bombardier is an international company that employs more than 3,000 people in the U.S. across 9 major facilities. We create thousands of U.S. jobs through 2,800 suppliers. We are actively investing in expanding our U.S. operations, including a recent announcement in Fort Wayne, Indiana. This is Bombardier reminding Trump, we're not just a Canadian company, we're a North American company. We employ Americans. We invest in America. We contribute to the American economy. Attacking Bombardier doesn't help American workers. It hurts them. And that Fort Wayne, Indiana expansion? That's a perfect example of how integrated the aerospace industry is across the U.S.-Canada border. Bombardier manufactures components in the U.S., assembles aircraft in Canada, and sells to customers on both sides of the border. Their supply chain involves thousands of American and Canadian companies working together. Trump's tariff threat doesn't disentangle that supply chain. It just makes it more expensive and dysfunctional. But here's what Bombardier didn't say publicly. This is personal for Trump. This is the latest escalation in his expanding feud with Mark Carney. It's retaliation for Carney's speech at Davos, where he warned about economic coercion and urged middle powers to stand together. Trump is using Bombardier as a proxy to punish Carney, and in the process, he's putting American aviation at risk. Let's zoom out and look at the pattern, because this aircraft threat is just the latest in a rapid escalation of attacks on Canada. Last Saturday, January 24th, Trump threatened 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods if Canada proceeded with a trade deal with China, a deal that Canada had already signed. Last week, Trump withdrew Canada's invitation to join his Board of Peace, publicly humiliating Carney. Now, Trump is threatening to ground Canadian planes and impose 50% tariffs on aircraft. This is a vendetta. This is Trump targeting Canada specifically because he's angry at Mark Carney for speaking out against American economic coercion. And it's working, in a perverse way. Every threat, every tariff, every public insult forces Canada to respond. It dominates news cycles. It puts Carney in a defensive position. But here's what Trump doesn't seem to understand. The more aggressively he attacks Canada, the more he proves Carney's point. Carney's entire Davos speech was about how great powers are using economic tools as weapons to coerce smaller nations. He warned that the rules-based international order is dead, and middle powers need to band together. And what does Trump do in response? He threatens to ground planes. He threatens 100% tariffs. He uses America's economic power as a cudgel. He's literally demonstrating Carney's thesis in real time. And Canada's response? They're diversifying away from dependence on the United States. They're signing trade deals with China, the EU, and other partners. They're reducing their vulnerability to American economic threats. Trump thinks he's punishing Canada. He's actually pushing Canada to become less dependent on America. That's a strategic disaster for U.S. interests. So can Trump actually do what he's threatening? Can he decertify Canadian aircraft and impose 50% tariffs? The short answer, it's complicated and likely illegal. On decertification, the Federal Aviation Administration, which is run by a Trump appointee, is responsible for certifying aircraft to operate in U.S. airspace. But certification is supposed to be based on safety standards, not political considerations. The FAA has a legal obligation to base its decisions on technical and safety criteria. Can Trump order the FAA to decertify aircraft for political reasons? Probably not without facing immediate legal challenges. Airlines, aircraft operators, and Bombardier itself would file lawsuits arguing that the decertification violates administrative law and puts passenger safety at risk by politicizing safety decisions. Courts would likely issue injunctions blocking the decertification until the legal issues are resolved. On tariffs, Trump has broad authority to impose tariffs under various trade laws, but a 50% tariff on aircraft would likely violate World Trade Organization rules and possibly the U.S.-Canada Trade Agreement, USMCA. Canada would immediately challenge the tariffs at the WTO and could impose retaliatory tariffs on American aerospace exports. Remember, the U.S. also exports aircraft and aircraft parts to Canada. Boeing, for example, sells commercial aircraft to Canadian airlines. American aerospace suppliers export components globally. If Trump imposes 50% tariffs on Canadian aircraft, Canada can respond with equivalent tariffs on American aerospace products. That hurts American companies just as much as Canadian ones. The practical reality, even if Trump tries to implement these threats, the disruption to American aviation would be so severe that he'd face immediate pressure to back down. Imagine the headlines: hundreds of flights canceled as Trump grounds Canadian aircraft, or regional air service collapses across America due to tariff dispute. That's politically toxic, especially heading into midterm elections. Let's be very clear about what we're watching. Donald Trump just threatened to weaponize aviation safety, the lives of passengers on thousands of flights, to punish Canada for a regulatory review process that's completely normal and appropriate. He's claiming Canada is blocking Gulfstream certification when they're actually just reviewing updated paperwork. He's threatening to ground Canadian planes not because they're unsafe, but because he's mad at Mark Carney. This is reckless. This is dangerous. This is unprecedented in modern aviation history. Aviation experts are calling it nonsense and warning it could undermine the entire global aviation safety system. American airlines are facing the prospect of having their regional jets grounded. American passengers could see flight cancellations and service disruptions. American aerospace workers at Bombardier's 9 U.S. facilities could see their jobs threatened, all because Trump wants to help Gulfstream beat Bombardier in the business jet market and punish Canada for signing a trade deal with China. This is what happens when you elect someone who thinks trade is a zero-sum game and sees every disagreement as a personal insult worthy of maximum retaliation. Trump promised to make America great again. Instead, he's making America unreliable, unpredictable, and dangerous to work with. Canada is responding by diversifying away from the U.S. market. Other countries are watching and drawing the same conclusion. Don't depend on America. Don't trust American commitments. Build alternatives. And American credibility, our greatest strategic asset, is being destroyed tweet by tweet, threat by threat, tariff by tariff. Thanks for watching. If this analysis showed you how Trump's trade wars are spiraling into genuinely dangerous territory, subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it. Because when a president starts threatening to ground planes over a paperwork dispute, we've crossed from economic policy into madness, and someone needs to say it.